All right. When you read scriptures, do you ever wonder what these people look like? Today we have electronic media for pictures. An EMP strike will wipe them all out. Before the electronic pictures, we had film, but film disintegrates over time. Before film, we had pictures, paintings. Even paintings could be destroyed by fire. But years ago, they had marble statues and busts of famous people. Now these people here are rulers of their day. These people here controlled life and death at a blink of an eye. We read about these people in the scriptures. And we're going to be, the main topic for my scriptures, my sermon today will be this guy. If you ever looked at him, we have no 100% proof that this is exactly him, but do we really have 100% proof of what George Washington looks like? We're taking people's words for it in paintings. Yeah, that's him, that's him. The same could be said with these. I am sure this man is rich and he's powerful, and he will make sure the artist has him right in his bust. The same with this guy right here. We all read about him and we know about these people. This guy right here is sentenced to sure to death. That's Pontius Pilate. That's my main topic for today. But this guy right here looks like a young kid. That's the guy that had John the Baptist's head cut off. That's Herod. So anyways, this Pilate has a moral struggle. So do we. But let's read first John 19. John 19, starting in verse 1. Then Pilate therefore took Yeshua and scourged him, and the soldiers platted a crown of thorns and put it on his head. And they put on him a purple robe and said, Hail, King of the Jews! And they smote him with their hands. Pilate therefore went forth again and said unto them, Behold, I bring him forth to you, that you may know that I find no fault in him. Then came Yeshua forth, wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. And Pilate said unto them, Behold the man. When the chief priests therefore and the officers saw him, they cried out, saying, Kill him, kill him. Put him on the stake, crucify him. Pilate said unto them, Take you him and kill him, for I find no fault in him. The Jews answered him, We have a law, and by our law he ought to die, because he made himself the son of Elohim. When Pilate therefore heard that saying, he was the more afraid, and went again into the judgment hall, and said unto Yeshua, Whence art thou? But Yeshua gave him no answer. Then said Pilate unto him, Speakest thou not unto me? Knowest thou not that I have power to put you on the stake, and have power to release you? Yeshua answered, Thou couldst have no power at all against me, except it were given thee from above. Therefore he that delivered me unto you has the greater sin. And from thenceforth Pilate sought to release him. But the Jews cried out, saying, If thou let this man go, thou art not Caesar's friend. Whosoever makes himself a king speaks against Caesar. When Pilate therefore heard that saying, he brought Yeshua forth and sat down in the judgment seat in a place that is called the Pavement, but in Hebrew, Gabbatha. And it was the preparation of the Passover. And about the 6th hour, and he said unto the Jews, Behold your king. But they cried out, Away with him, kill him. Pilate said unto them, Shall I crucify, put him on the stake, your king? The chief priests answered, We have no king but Caesar. Then delivered he him therefore unto them to be killed. And they took Yeshua and led him away. That's that guy right there. He said it. Away with him there. In our text, we encounter a tremendous moral struggle. The man experiencing this struggle is the governor of Judea, Pontius Pilate. His struggle begins when providence brings him face to face with our Master Yeshua Messiah. His encounter with Yeshua is an encounter with truth, and truth always demands a response. But I want to examine the elements of his struggle, and by doing that, learn how to successfully deal with our own struggles. The verdict of Pilate's own conscience is loud and clear. He knows Yeshua is innocent. Over and over again, we hear him say concerning Yeshua, I find no fault in this man. Pilate knows that Yeshua is innocent of the charges that have been brought against him. He even knows why these religious leaders have trumped up these charges against Yeshua. You find this in Matthew 27, verse 18. For he knew that for envy they had delivered him. Pilate cannot claim ignorance concerning Yeshua's guilt. He personally interrogated him several times. Each interrogation further confirmed Yeshua's innocence. Pilate's conscience is also telling him that there is something very unusual about Yeshua. He has sat in judgment over hundreds of men. He knows how people respond when faced with a death sentence. He expects to see either a trembling soul pleading for mercy and begging for his life, or a hardened criminal trying to lie or bribe his way out of trouble. At one point, he is so flabbergasted by Yeshua's demeanor that he says to him in John 19, verse 10, Then says Pilate unto him, Speakest thou not unto me? No, knowest thou not that I have power to crucify, which means stake, put you on a stake, and have power to release you? Remember the word crucify. 47:17 is staru. To stake, drive down stakes, to fortify with driven stakes, to palisade, to crucify one is a metaphor to crucify the flesh, destroy its power utterly. The nature of the figure implying that the destruction is attended with intense pain. Every answer Yeshua gave Pilate brought more and more truth to bear. Yeshua answered those questions by talking about the real source of authority, which is Yahweh, not Caesar. Yeshua had talked to Pilate about the nature of his kingdom. A kingdom not from this world, but from heaven above. He had talked with him about two kinds of people, those on the side of truth and those in opposition to truth. Sounds like today, doesn't it? You see this on all over the place. They don't want to hear it. Pilate progressively realizes that there is something highly unusual about Yeshua. John 19, verse 7. The Jews finally tell Pilate the reason they want Yeshua put to death. Up to that time, they had tried to frame their accusations in a way that would win Pilate's agreement with them against Yeshua. But in the heat of the moment, the truth spills out. We have a law. And according to our law, he must die. Now, here comes the truth. Because he claimed to be the son of Elohim. With everything Pilate has observed about Yeshua and everything his conscience is screaming, those words were terrifying. Pilate was not a Jew. In fact, he despised the Jews. He did not embrace their religious belief, but as Roman, he was religious of his own. And it was very common for Romans to believe in demigods like Hercules or many other mythologies. Maybe this Yeshua really is a supernatural being. His demeanor certainly indicates something very unusual. John tells us in verse 8 of our text, when Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid. In addition to all of this, Yahweh gave Pilate's wife a dream. We do not know exactly what she saw in the dream, but we do know that Yahweh sent it as a supernatural warning to Pilate and his wife. Matthew 27, verse 19. When he was set down on the judgment seat, his wife sent unto him, saying, Have thou nothing to do with that just man? For I have suffered many things this day in a dream because of him. There is Pilate struggling with his own conscience. He knows Yeshua's innocent. Everything within him is saying, Yeshua is innocent. There is obviously something unusual about Yeshua that may very well be supernatural. Then comes this message from his wife. Don't have anything to do with this as an innocent man. You see the grace in Yahweh in all this? A man's conscience is telling him the right thing to do. Then Yahweh mercifully sends a supernatural dream to warn him even further. Pilate knows what is right. He has the authority by his own confession to do the right thing. And here's his problem. The voice of the crowd is in conflict with his conscience, and he wants to please the crowd. We know what the truth is. It's in the scriptures. It's hard to follow because the world is hollering. Don't follow it. Don't look at it. You're crazy. Pilate has a lot to lose here. He is in a position of power and advantage. He is respected. His wife enjoys their palace. He makes good money and has a great future. The problem is, if he follows his conscience, he may lose all of it. He has already been reprimanded by Rome for mishandling previous events. He does not need to have more complaints sent in from local authorities. Yes, he is in charge, but Caesar's approach to government is to pacify the locals as much as possible and keep collecting their taxes. It almost sounds like our government, doesn't it? Keep them quiet, you keep paying. If Pilate cannot handle this, they will get someone who can. Think about our situation in Iraq, especially before sovereignty was handed over to the new Iraqi government. We have the military might and the authority to control the region. But if we are insensitive to the religious customs of the people, we could find ourselves facing an impossible situation. We want leaders there who take charge, but not to needlessly alienate the people. And that was also what Rome wanted. Do not rock the boat. The Jewish leaders know Pilate's vulnerability, and they play it quite well. When Pilate tried to set Yeshua free, the Jews kept shouting, "If you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar's." That hit Pilate's struggle dead center. The right thing to do was to set Yeshua free. But was he willing to pay the price to do the right thing? Pilate did what we are often tempted to do in a situation like this. He tried to avoid the decision as much as he could. First, when the Jews brought Yeshua to him, he tried to hand him back to them. In John 18:31, then said Pilate unto him, unto them, Take you him, and judge him according to your law. The Jews therefore said unto him, It is not lawful for us to put any man to death. That didn't work because they were insistent on death penalty, which the Jews could not execute without Roman approval. The Jewish leaders forced Pilate's hand by saying that Yeshua had claimed to be a king. A Roman governor could not ignore that kind of claim without getting into trouble with his superiors. If he ignored it and then Yeshua did lead a rebellion, he would be accountable for not dealing with it. And second, Pilate's second attempt to avoid a decision happened when he heard that Yeshua was from Galilee. In Luke 23, verse 7, And as soon as he knew that he belonged unto Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who himself also was at Jerusalem at the time. There was Herod, the younger version of the man. Luke 23, verse 7 tells us that Galilee was under Herod's jurisdiction. So Pilate sent Yeshua to Herod, who also was in Jerusalem at the time. We know from Luke's account that Herod was glad to see Yeshua because he wanted Yeshua to work miracle for him. He knew all about him. He knew about John. He cut his head off. He wanted Yeshua to put on a show. But instead, Yeshua wouldn't even answer Herod's questions. Herod's soldiers abused and mocked Yeshua and sent him back to Pilate. Pilate then had a stroke of genius. He remembered a custom observed during the Passover in which the Roman governor would let the people choose one prisoner to be released. Pilate saw this as a solution to his problem, and he would narrow the choice between Yeshua and a scoundrel named Barabbas. Barabbas was such a lowlife, he was sure that they would not choose him. But the Jewish leaders were determined to have Yeshua killed, and they led the crowd in asking for Barabbas instead of Yeshua. Pilate's moral dilemma just would not go away. It was during this effort that he learned about his wife's dream. I wonder if Pilate wanted to do this, but he figured it was better than putting Yeshua to death. He ordered his soldiers to flog Yeshua. Historians tell us that the whips used by the Romans had pieces of metal and bone tied in each thong. These whippings were so brutal that some died from the flogging alone. John tells us that the soldiers mocked Yeshua and repeatedly slapped him on the face and with their hands. They put a purple robe on him and ridiculed him as king and crown of thorns on his head. In that pitiful condition, Pilate brought Yeshua before the crowd, confident that they would be satisfied with the punishment and consent to Yeshua's release. But that didn't work either. They continued to demand that Yeshua be put to death. During this whole ordeal, Pilate tried over and over again to reason with the mob and get them to let Yeshua go. But every effort put the decision right back in his lap. Would he or would he not authorize the killing of Yeshua? The vacillation of Pilate's will accumulates in the wrong decision. Finally, Pilate handed him over to them to be crucified. John 19, verse 6, When the chief priests, therefore, and officers saw him, they cried out, saying, Crucify him, put him to the stake. Put him to the stake. Pilate said unto them, Take you him and put him to the stake. For I find no fault in him. In addition to trying to avoid making the decision he ultimately had to make, Pilate also did a couple of things to try to appease his conscience. During the latter stages of the process, he took a bowl of water and washed his hands before the crowd and said to them, "I am innocent of this man's blood. It is your responsibility." In Matthew 27, verse 24, you will remember the chilling answer the crowd gave to that statement. Verse 25, then answered all the people and said, "His blood be upon us and on our children." There is a significant contrast between Pilate and the religious rulers in Jerusalem. Yeshua addressed the contrast in John 19, verse 11, when he said to Pilate, "Thou couldst have no power at all against me, except it were given thee from above. Therefore he that delivers me unto you has the greater sin." Most scholars conclude that Yeshua is referring to the high priest Caiaphas. It's doubtful that Pilate knew anything about Judas. He would have probably understood Yeshua to be talking about the religious ruler of the Jews who had brought Yeshua to him. Notice that Yeshua does indicate degrees of guilt in his statement. There is good evidence that there will be degrees, for when the books are opened on Judgment Day, in Revelation 20, verse 13, tells us that each will be judged according to what he had done. Revelation 20:13, and the seas gave up the dead which were in it. Death and hell delivered up the dead which were in them. They were judged, every man according to their works. Caiaphas and the other Jewish rulers had sinned more than Pilate had. They had the scriptures and were in spiritual leadership, but they also were far more set in their opposition to Yeshua than Pilate was. Today there are people like Caiaphas who are all out against Yeshua. They have had great opportunity to know the truth, but instead of loving the truth, they have set themselves in opposition to it. They have the greater condemnation. The Bible is the truth, and they have nothing to do with it. They pick and choose. They pick what they like and deny what they don't like, because it condemns their lifestyle. But what about Pilate's compromise? Caiaphas may have greater guilt, but Pilate nonetheless is guilty. He violated his own conscience. He even did it in spite of the warning that Yahweh sent in a dream to his wife. 1 Timothy 6:13, Paul reminded Timothy that Yeshua witnessed a good confession before Pilate. 1 Timothy 6:13, I give thee charge in the sight of Yahweh, who quickens all things, and before Messiah Yeshua, who before Pontius Pilate witnessed a good confession. Pilate had every opportunity to make the right choice, but simply decided to protect his own position rather than do the right thing. There's people out there that know scriptures, but they'd rather be loved by the world. They choose the world. By washing his hands before the crowd, he was sending a message to the Jewish crowd. In fact, the ritual was not a Roman ceremony, but a Jewish one. According to Deuteronomy 21, verse 6 through 9, this is what the elders were to do in the case of an unsolved murder. They were to publicly declare their innocence in that way, but the ritual itself was not the whole story. The ritual was an outward declaration of what was already true. They were innocent, and this was their statement of the fact. But Pilate was not innocent of the blood of Yeshua. He not only flogged an innocent man, but he authorized his death. That ritual alone would not change that fact. Even today, people try to use religious rituals the way Pilate did. People who have never surrendered their lives to Messiah go through water baptism thinking that ceremony will by itself give them the right standing before Yahweh. But water baptism is to be the answer of a good conscience towards Yahweh in a person's heart. But just doing a ritual without the spiritual reality is not sufficient. Even though Pilate's ritual came from the Bible, it did not remove his guilt. Pilate did one other thing to appease his conscience. He had a sign fastened to Yeshua's stake, which said, Yeshua of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. John 19, verse 21 and 22 tells us that when the chief priests complained about the sign and wanted it changed to simply say that Yeshua claimed to be King of the Jews, Pilate answered, what I have written, I have written. John 19:21, then said the chief priest to the Jews to Pilate, write not the King of the Jews, but that he said, I am King of the Jews. Pilate said, what I have written, I have written. Pilate is obviously still in a personal struggle. I'd love to know the conversation that went on between Pilate and Joseph of Arimathea when that devout follower of Yeshua went to Pilate for the body of Yeshua. It would have been interesting to hear the conversations that went on between Pilate and his wife once the stories about Yeshua's resurrection began to circulate around Jerusalem. We do not know what eventually happened to Pilate. All kinds of traditions and legends exist. The Coptic church, Egyptian church, is said to observe June 25th as a day of honoring Pilate as a saint and martyr. The Greek church honors Pilate's wife as a saint. Eusebius' story is more likely. He says that Pilate was banished to the city of Vienna in Gaul, France, where he eventually committed suicide. We do know from the historian Josephus that Pilate eventually lost the position that he tried so desperately to retain at the trial of Yeshua. In 36 AD, Pilate was called to Rome to answer complaints brought against, and his governorship ended. What did Pilate's compromise buy him? A few short years of luxury, and then he lost it all anyways. What will a man give in exchange for his soul? What mistakes did Pilate make? He valued the wrong things. He valued temporary comfort and power over the kingdom of heaven and eternity. People out there, what do they value most? They want the world. They want the people of the world to like them. If you believe in the Bible, you're just a fool. And he also feared the wrong things. The fear of man brings a snare. Pilate knew that his past behavior would not hold up under scrutiny by Rome. He was intimidated by the Jewish leaders' threat to accuse him of disloyalty to Caesar. The fear of Yahweh is the beginning of wisdom. Although Pilate had a conscience and a certain fear of doing wrong, his fear of man was stronger than the fear of Yahweh. And Yeshua said in Matthew 10, verse 28, and fear not them which kill the body, but are not able to kill the soul, but rather fear him which is able to destroy both soul and body. He failed to heed Yahweh's warning. Yahweh mercifully sent a dream to Pilate's wife. And guys, if your wife comes to you and tells you something, that listen to her. Pilate was not turned by a supernatural warning, even though it came through someone he could trust. He failed to take a firm stand for what he knew was right. He was double-minded. He was torn between two directions. On the one hand, he wanted to do the right thing, But more than that, he was unwilling to risk his personal desires to do it. This is the truth we must learn from Pilate's error. A little compromise leads to more compromises. A half-hearted stand for what is right will usually crumble under the pressures of temptations. Make a firm decision to do the right thing, and then do not play with the alternatives. Do not try some slick compromises like Pilate did when he offered the choice between Barabbas and Yeshua, or when he flogged Yeshua. Do not avoid the decision. Make the decision to do what's right and trust Yahweh with the outcome. Follow Daniel, not Pilate. Take your stand the way the 3 Hebrew children did, and let Yahweh take care of the results. Are you faced with any kind of moral struggle? Ask Yahweh to give you the courage to do the right thing. Listen to his voice. Allow him to address your conscience with truth. Hear the warnings and counsel he may give from his word, or even through dreams and visions. They will dream dreams in the last days. His word is truth. Decide right here and right now that there will be no compromise. There will be no vacillating. There will simply be the commitment to do the right thing and let Yahweh take care of the rest. I know it's hard. I know. But do it. Yahweh did not let Yeshua go through all of that suffering so you could sin as you please. Remember, in 1 Corinthians 6 verse 9, know you not that the unrighteous shall not inherit the kingdom of Yahweh. Be not deceived, neither fornicators, nor adulterers, nor idolaters and adulterers, nor effeminate, nor abusers of themselves with mankind, nor thieves, nor covetous, drunkards, revilers, nor extortioners shall inherit the kingdom of Yahweh. There's walls around the kingdom. There's gates there. And he has laws that have to be followed. In order for you to get in, you have to follow his way of life. May Yahweh bless you with the strength, because you're going to need it. May he bless you with strength to do the right thing. And I'll see you there in the kingdom.